The incense smoke in the papal apartments smelled of ancient resins, myrrh, frankincense, cassia. It had been decades since this particular scent had filled these corridors. A new pope had been elected, but more than a name had changed. On the table before him lay something that had not been found in the Vatican library for over 300 years. A mathematical treatise from the Abbasid Empire, translated into Latin by Jewish scholars in Toledo. The year was 1086. The Pope was Victor III, and he was about to make a decision that would tilt the entire future of European learning. But here is what most history books skip. He did not act alone. He was following a thread that began with a single question, a question raised by a monk in the monastery of Monte Cassino a full generation earlier. And the answer to that question, when it finally arrived, carried with it a forgotten principle. A principle that governs how knowledge survives, how it migrates, and how it can be erased if you are not watching. Open loop. The survival of classical science in the Christian West was not inevitable. It wasn't the result of the Renaissance or the printing press or the voyages of discovery. It was the result of a deliberate choice made at a precise moment by a small group of men who understood that the old manuscripts were not artifacts. They were living key, and they were about to be lost forever if someone did not act. If that realization lands with you, that the survival of entire fields of knowledge hung on the decisions of a few individuals, then you understand why this channel exists. We trace the threads that official histories leave out. Subscribe so you can follow every turn of the story, because the next thread begins in a place you least expect. And tell me in the comments, what moment in history do you suspect was a near miss like this one? What knowledge almost didn't survive? The official narrative, the one you find in most textbooks, goes like this. After the fall of Rome, science retreated to the Arab world. The Muslims preserved Aristotle and Galen while Europe slept. Then, in the 12th and 13th centuries, translation movements in Spain and Sicily transferred this knowledge back to the Latins. The schoolmen of Paris used it to build a new intellectual order. The Vatican, according to this story, spent most of the Middle Ages suspicious of this new learning. That is a half-truth. It leaves out the most important character and the most decisive moment. The first anomaly appears in the form of a letter. It was written in 1085 in the monastery of Monte Cassino by a Benedictine monk named Desiderius. Desiderius was not a philosopher. He was an abbot, and before that, he had been a diplomat and a builder. He had traveled to Constantinople. He had seen the Greek libraries. He knew that the Latins had lost something precious, not just texts, but the skill of reading them. His letter was addressed to a Muslim scholar in Cairo, a man named Ali ibn Ridwan, who had written a commentary on Ptolemy's astronomy that Desiderius had heard about through trade routes. The letter asked, in formal, cautious Latin, whether Ibn Ridwan would be willing to send copies of his commentaries to Monte Cassino. In exchange, Desiderius offered something the Muslim world needed: information about the silting of the Nile Delta, which was affecting maritime trade. Imagine the scene: a Benedictine abbot on that rocky hillside between Rome and Naples, sitting at a desk illuminated by a single oil lamp, writing to a physician in Cairo. The letter took months to arrive. The response, when it came, was a long scroll wrapped in waxed linen. Inside, diagrams of planetary motion that no Latin scholar had seen in 5 centuries. The sun was not perfect. The moon had mountains, and Ptolemy's models had been corrected. This was the first thread. Desiderius did not stop there. He sent letters to Damascus, to Baghdad, to Cordoba. He built a network, quiet, scholarly, unremarkable to anyone not paying attention. By the time he was elected Pope in 1086, taking the name Victor III, He had already arranged for the smuggling of over 200 Arabic manuscripts into Italy, not by conquest, by correspondence. Now trace the anomaly backward. Why was Desiderius so obsessed with recovering this material? The answer lies 20 years earlier, in an event that most history books treat as a footnote: the Norman conquest of southern Italy. In 1061, the Normans, already conquerors of England, turned their attention to Byzantine Italy. They sacked the city of Bari, the seat of Greek learning in the peninsula. The Byzantine governor, a man named Michael Dokeanos, was killed. The Greek library in Bari, 15,000 volumes, was looted and scattered. Desiderius was then the prior of Monte Cassino. He watched as Greek-speaking scholars fled east, taking their manuscripts with them. He saw the last generation of Latin-speaking readers who could actually consult the original works of Galen and Ptolemy in Greek. The window was closing. If the knowledge was not translated into Latin within 20 years, it would be gone for centuries. He was right. The spiral continues. 20 years before Bari, in 1041, the Byzantine Empire had faced a crisis of its own. The Emperor Michael IV, ill and paranoid, had purged the court of any scholar with ties to the ancient Hellenic academies. The philosopher Michael Psellos, the last great reader of Plato in Byzantium, had been forced into a monastery. The academy, the direct successor of Plato's original, was closed by imperial decree. The manuscripts were moved to the imperial library and locked in chests. So by the time Desiderius began his letter writing, the Greek originals were already disappearing in the East as well. The Abbasid capital of Baghdad, once the intellectual center of the world, had been sacked by the Seljuk Turks in 1055. The House of Wisdom was in ruins. The manuscripts had been burned or scattered. The safety net that historians describe, the Arab preservation of Greek science, was already fraying. The window of translation was narrowing. This is the moment where most narratives would skip. But you're still here, because you understand that history's turning points are often quiet. To stay with us as we uncover more of these hidden decisions, subscribe and become part of a community that refuses to settle for the textbook version. And in the comments, share the name of one scholar or translator you think deserved more credit than they got, because the people who preserve knowledge rarely get remembered. And yet, from Rome, Desiderius saw it. He sent word to the Jewish community in Toledo, which had been acting as linguistic brokers between Arabic and Latin for a century. He recruited a young monk from Lombardy named Constantine the African, who had spent 30 years in the Fatimid court and knew both Arabic and Greek. Constantine brought with him 70 manuscripts, the entire canon of Islamic medicine, and began translating at Monte Cassino. The culmination of this thread is a single moment. It occurred in 1087, in the scriptorium of Monte Cassino. Constantine the African was seated at a desk, a stack of Arabic manuscripts to his left, a stack of Latin parchment to his right. He was translating the complete book of the medical art by Ali ibn al-Abbas al-Majusi, a work that contained, among other things, the first clear description of the circulatory system. The Latin translation would be called the Pantagni. And here is the forgotten principle. Translation is not a neutral transfer. It is a creative act. Constantine did not simply render Arabic into Latin, word by word. He selected. He condensed. He rearranged the chapters to fit a Christian theological framework. He omitted passages he judged dangerous, parts of al-Majusi's discussion of the soul, for example, that sounded too Aristotelian. He added glosses from his own clinical experience in the hospitals of Cairo. The Pantagni that reached Europe was not al-Majusi's work. It was a hybrid, part Arabic medicine, part Byzantine commentary, part Latin monastic practice. The decision of what to translate and what to omit became the DNA of European medical education for the next 4 centuries. Meanwhile, in the papal library, Desiderius was doing the same with astronomy. He selected Ptolemy's Almagest, but omitted the sections on astrology that conflicted with church teaching. He commissioned a new Latin edition of Euclid's Elements, but had the geometric proofs reordered to match a Latinate logical structure. The mathematics survived, but deformed, and that deformation was itself the forgotten principle. Knowledge does not survive intact. It survives in the shape that the preservers decide is safe. The act of preservation is an act of control. Now, to connect this to your world, look at any modern institution, a university, a think tank, a research library. The same principle operates today. What gets digitized first? What gets funded for preservation? What gets removed from curricula or classified? The question is never, should this be preserved? The question is always, who decides this is worth preserving? And that decision is made by people with their own priorities, their own fears, their own agendas. When you scroll through articles about ancient history that seem incomplete, when you sense that a full story is being withheld, that sensation is not paranoia. It is the echo of centuries of selective transmission. You are feeling the shadow of Constantine the African and Victor III, deciding what parts of the past you are allowed to touch. The first loop closes here. Desiderius died in 1087, just 1 year after becoming pope. His letter network collapsed. Constantine the African continued translating, but the momentum faded. It would take another century for the translation movement to restart in Toledo and Palermo. The Monte Cassino library was sacked by the Normans again in 1099. Many of Constantine's manuscripts were lost, but the deformed knowledge had already traveled. The Pantegni was copied and sent to Paris, to Salerno, to Chartres. By the time the complete works of Aristotle reached the West in the 1200s, the physicians of Salerno were already using a version of the circulatory system, flawed by omission, but still functional. The seed had been planted. The question that remains open, the loop that connects to the next chapter, is this. What else did we lose? If the window of translation between 1061 and 1087 was so narrow, what treasures slipped through it while no one was watching? The scrolls that Desiderius never received, the letters that were captured by pirates in the Mediterranean, the commentaries of Ibn Ridwan that burned in the sacking of Cairo. There are ghosts in the history of science, knowledge that touched the page once and vanished into ash. Those ghosts are still waiting to be found, but only if we keep asking the questions that institutions avoid. If you want to be part of that search, subscribe now so you don't miss the next episode, because what we uncover in the desert might be the biggest ghost of all. And before you go, leave a comment with a single word that captures what you feel when you realize how much has been lost. Ash, silence, thread, or ghost. I'll read everyone. In the next episode, we will trace a different thread. A single papyrus, discovered in 1960 in a cave near the Dead Sea, that contains a text no one thought existed. A lost work of the Greek astronomer Eudoxus, written in a script that predates Ptolemy by 400 years. It changes everything we thought we knew about the origins of the heliocentric model. And it was found in a jar, wrapped in cloth, buried under 19 centuries of silence. But that is another door, another library, another letter that almost got lost. And you will be the one who opens it. For now, let the incense smoke clear. The abbey at Monte Cassino still stands, rebuilt after the war. The scriptorium is a museum. Tourists walk past the glass cases, looking at manuscripts they cannot read, unaware that the choice made in this room, the choice of what to keep and what to lose, reached into their own pockets, into their own language, into the very shape of their own thinking. Every fact you hold in your mind has been curated. Every piece of ancient knowledge you trust has survived the screen of some gatekeeper, a pope, a monk, a translator, a sultan, a librarian who thought this part is safe. The rest was burned, buried, omitted, or deformed into something the next generation could stomach. This is the truth that hides in plain sight. History is not what happened. It is what someone decided to hand down. The rest is dust, and the only way to touch the dust, to find the ghosts, to open the letters that were never written, is to ask the one question that every institution, every textbook, every comfortable narrative tries to make you forget. What else is there? The incense is gone, the scriptorium is empty, but the question is still in the air. If this shifted something in the way you see the past, tell me in the comments. What piece of knowledge do you suspect was edited out before it reached you? And if you want to keep looking, save this video. The next door opens in the desert.